Hi, I'm John Green. Or maybe not so much. Well, I'm his replacement, anyhow, for this episode. And this is Crash Course World History. Today we're going to talk about something called the Cuban Missile Crisis. This is probably one of the most scary moments after World War II for Americans, as well as the Russians, Cubans, and for the rest of the world as well. Because you see, the world is intertwined in a way that asshole countries such as US and Russia push their agenda onto the less fortunate countries. Cuba, Vietnam, sorry, I got a big cough, Korea. And I will remind you that it is not cursing if I am talking about a donkey. The Cuban Missile Crisis was not just a singular thing that sporadically happened, but the culmination of a few things. Let's rewind. In the aftermath of World War II, Russia, or as it was called during this time the Soviet Union, went on a massive land grab in Eastern Europe. As Winston Churchill once said, the Iron Curtain has descended upon us. This led to the newly founded spread of communism, which affected the new nations of East Germany, North Korea, and newly founded communist Vietnam. This massive ideology split between communism and democracy, or as was taught as the difference between good and evil, depending on where the lesson was being taught. As rivalries intensified, the arms race commenced, and the amount of nuclear weapons in silos increased over 100-fold in a matter of years. One day, the Soviet Union decided to build a nuclear missile silo in Cuba, 90 miles from the American shores. Simply put, for America, this was not a good thing. Alright, to understand why Cuba wanted this silo and to show why the Russians felt they needed it, I'm going to take it yet again back a step. As the Soviets increased their spread over Europe, the United States and democratic allies known as NATO decided to combat this in any way they could. One way they did this was by building multiple silos surrounding the Soviet Union. If I was Russia and suddenly a bunch of nukes were pointed my way, I think I'd feel a little scared, if not at least threatened. They were probably like, what the hell, man? I'm just trying to enlighten the world with a better way of living and trying to make the world a better place than it is. And this is the thanks I get? Well, at the time the increasing number of impoverished citizens of communist nations would disagree, that's probably what the Soviets were thinking. At least the leaders, anyways. So they ventured to Cuba to point a shiny little missile at the US so that they could be like, ha, we can do stuff too. I mean, to be completely fair, if we have a missile pointed at them, don't you think they felt entitled to return the favor or at least protect themselves? Meanwhile, in Cuba, the United States had threatened them in many ways, one of which they trained thousands of escaped Cuban revolutionaries to take back their country in the name of democracy, which did not go exactly well. Afterwards, named the Bay of Pigs, as the revolutionaries were slaughtered and rounded up like pigs, they were defeated in the first few days. And to make matters worse, the US kind of dropped them off, promised they would help, but then just left them there without any air support because we wanted to keep plausible deniability. I mean, what the hell? If a bunch of Cuban nationals show up with training from the CIA, US guns, and US transport ships to drop them off, I mean, what the hell kind of plausible deniability can you have? I mean, that's just like so uncool. Like dropping off your friend in New Jersey and promising you will both go to Atlantic City, but then drop your friend off 30 miles from Atlantic City with no transportation means and just leave them. I mean, come on. Basically, the invasion sucked, and no help arrived for the Cubans. On October 14th, 1962, an American U-2 spy plane flying over Cuba captured pictures of long-range Soviet missiles in Cuba. This was a crisis like never before. These missiles could reach any point of the United States with nuclear warheads causing mass destruction. President Kennedy called a meeting with his main security advisors. They considered a number of options from diplomacy to full-scale attack and invasion of Cuba. The Joint Chiefs of Staff voted to invade. They felt this was the only viable option. However, Kennedy was concerned that this would start World War III between the US and the Soviet Union. he opted to set up a naval blockade. Kennedy announced his plan on October 22, 1962. He showed the world the missile bases and said that the United States would be putting Cuba under quarantine. This meant that no offensive weapons would be allowed to enter Cuba. He also said that any attack on the U.S. from Cuba would be considered an act of war from the Soviet Union. Over the next several days, the crisis became more intense. The Soviet Union said they would not back down. By the 24th, Kennedy believed the U.S. would have to invade Cuba. Although the Soviet Union was publicly saying they would never back down, they were secretly negotiating with the United States. Eventually, the two sides reached an agreement. The Soviet Union would remove the missiles from Cuba as long as the United States never agreed to never invade Cuba again. In secret, the U.S. also had to agree to remove their nuclear missiles from Turkey and Italy. The crisis was over. The crisis was President Kennedy's greatest moment. After the Bay of Pigs failure and the Berlin Wall, his leadership had come into question. The world could feel confident in the leader of the United States again.